So that was an HTML page. HTML pages are great. They present information to the user, but information is static. There is nothing dynamic about the web page at all, really. And companies felt the need for something a bit more compelling. Give the ability for the user to view real-time data or to interact with the web page, for example, to order items from a shopping cart. HTML doesn't offer any of this. So, to address this need, Microsoft introduced Active Server Pages, or ASP. ASP pages are stored on the web server, and they contain a mixture of static HTML and executable script, which runs at the web server. Let me show you a simple example of an ASP page. Now this example I'm going to demonstrate for you. You're not going to be able to run this example unless you configure the database on your system. So you'll probably just want to watch what I'm doing for this particular example. In the My Web folder directory, if you remember, we have a file called getEmployees.asp. We'll have a look at the code in there shortly, but first of all, let's run the application and see what it actually looks like. So to run the application, we'll go back into Internet Explorer. The URL for the web page is http://localhost/mywebfolder/getEmployees.asp. So let's go. So you can see the web page displays employee names and salaries. This is my family. And this information was generated dynamically from data from a database. So let's take a look at the code for the ASP page. I'm going to leave Internet Explorer running because we'll come back to that in a moment. And I'll just tab back to Windows Explorer and we'll open getEmployees.asp in Notepad. Now ordinarily, if I was doing real development with ASP, I'd use a development tool such as Visual InterDev from Microsoft, but Notepad will do fine for our purposes here. So let's just briefly pick out some of the main points in the code here. First things first, this statement at the beginning is called a page directive. It runs at the server and it tells Microsoft IIS what programming language we've used on the ASP page. I've used VBScript here. I could have used JavaScript if I'd wanted to. The next section of the page, between the angle bracket and the percent, way down here to the percent close angle bracket, is VBScript code. Now this isn't a lesson on VBScript, so I'm not going to dwell on the details here, but briefly you can see what we've done is created a connection to a database. The database name is employees. I've previously configured that on my system so that it knows that it corresponds to the employees.mdb database. The next statements create a statement object and select all data from the employees table in that database. And then the next two statements execute the statement and retrieve a result set. The result set contains all the data from the query. So that's the end of the code section. We then switch back into HTML mode. Now, at this stage, you're probably getting one of the problems with ASP pages is that you're constantly flitting back and forth from code mode into HTML mode, and it makes it quite difficult to actually understand what's happening. Obviously, this is a very simple example. You can imagine in a more realistic, complex scenario, the amount of code here would be a little bit more intimidating, and it would be quite difficult to read. So the HTML displays a heading, title. Here we have a heading, and then we set up a table, and the table displays a table row with column headings. So the first column heading will display table name in bold, and the second table heading will display salary, which is also in bold. And then at this point, we switch back into VBScript mode again, and we're going to loop through each row in the data returned from the database. And for each row from the database, we're going to create an HTML table row. There it is. The table row will have two columns. The first column displays the name field from the database, and the second column displays the salary column from the database. So that's the end of our HTML section, and then we switch back into code mode and we move on to the next row from the database and iterate the loop one more time, and that's the end of the code section. Then we switch back into HTML mode to close off the HTML page, and finally we switch back yet again into code mode to close the database connection. So there we are, ASP pages. Developers have been using ASP pages for 8 years now, And whilst they offer the benefit of dynamically generated content, the disadvantages are fairly clear. As you've seen, ASP pages can get quite complicated. The mixture of HTML and script in the same file can make it quite hard to read ASP pages and even harder to debug them. Also, the script in ASP pages is interpreted at runtime, which makes it quite a lot slower than compiled programming languages. So I think we've seen enough of ASP. Let's just close Notepad, and I'm going to switch back to Internet Explorer, and I'm going to close that as well. Alt F4.